بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وهو الذي أرسله الله تبارك وتعالى بالهدى ودين الحق يعلم الناس القرآن فنصلي ونسلم عليه وعلى الأنبياء أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So we wanted to continue where we were at in our reflection with regard to the necessity for a radical reformation of the way that we approach marriage in the Muslim community. And so what remains are three fundamental points which we need to look at, and then we'll wrap up with regard to this framework. Of course, there's some other work that has to be done, but we're just laying the ground rules for how we should be thinking with regard to the issue of marriage. The thing that is most neglected when it comes to looking at partners and when it comes to the maintenance of marriage and the struggles that result therein is the issue of the way that social realities, and included in that is custom and culture and situations which people suffer in their daily lives and their familial lives. Familial lives meaning that they're part of a family, and we're talking prior to marriage, right? There's things that people go through in those family contexts that a lot of times they don't pay attention to how those things impact and affect their choice of spouse or how it is that they themselves may react towards situations, right? So understanding social realities, it goes beyond just understanding your family context. Yesterday when we talked about this point, we talked a little bit about that there's a necessity to understand yourself before going into marriage. A lot of people haven't had time to really be with themselves. And what I mean by be with themselves is really do a lot of self-work and self-exploration and come to a kind of a consciousness of where they're at with a lot of things. And we coupled that with saying that there's a necessity to have a strong foundation in Islam. And that foundation in Islam is not just a matter of being people that know how to articulate certain points, whether in Aqidah or fiqh or whatever. We have to have a mature understanding of Islam and its spirit and its principles. And I would say even to a level that will allow us to be effective in our application of the deen in imperfect situations. Because this is what social reality is dictating. The situations are very imperfect. And so we just hit on the fact that culture and family life and even your own issues may have an impact, right? And you have to be aware of that, of how you think about things and who you marry. And then also how you going back to how you think about things, how you process issues, but also the reality of life itself. We have a lot of situations in today's time, in specific in the Muslim community and in general, we find similar problems in other communities outside of the Muslim community. But, we're seeing radical transformations of people's lives, especially on the economic side, on the political side. We're seeing masses of people become refugees overnight. We're seeing, economic transformations that have kept certain communities impoverished for long periods of time. We're seeing instability in the job market. We're seeing the cost of living is exorbitant. And so we can't expect that a good portion of people are going to, everyone's going to make a high six-figure salary and into the millions and beyond. And people who think like that are delusional, that you're going to just have masses of people, in that direction. You're going to have a certain sort of group that is functioning in that direction. and there will be sacrifices that are made. So, and that's why we were saying that, the issue of deen is important. Part of the 3 points that we're talking about today is understanding social realities and basically being aware of how they impact us in our choice of marriage and our maintenance of the marriage. And then the third point is the issue of economics. The second point is communication, conflict resolution. And that's important too, because of the angle of when the economic situation is not right, if you don't understand what the social realities are and how that's impacting people in the workplace and how it's driving the cost of food up and how it's driving the cost. Right now, there's a 4% increase on petroleum due to the situation in Iraq. The ramifications on that on the global economy will come back and hit the household, because we have to understand petroleum is put on vegetables. Petroleum is used, for a number of different things, plastics, all kinds of stuff. And so when these types of situations take place, they have impacts on different parts of the world. And a lot of times they have impacts on us directly. And so, sometimes we're not wise to see that, that increase, whether it's 25 cents or $1 or whatever it may be to food stuff, it also hits the gas, is going to have an impact on how we're functioning within the marriage. And that goes for everything to utility bills and so on and so forth. So we don't have an understanding of social realities, and we don't have an understanding of economics, and we don't know how to communicate with each other, and we don't have a process of how to navigate conflict. The end result is going to be that marriage is unstable and possibly doomed in today's society to just collapsing. And we mentioned yesterday that we have to be aware of our reality in this country of how we look at marriage. And that comes even back to the issue of social realities. The way that we look at the marital contract. And I mentioned the difference between duty and romanticism. A lot of us are coming out of this romantic, the whole concept of feeling a certain way, and that's what moves the relationship, whether it's a sexual feeling or whether it's the aesthetics, the beauty of the person that's drawing our attention. That is something that is very common across the board, and it impacts Muslims in this society. The issue of romantic inspiration towards a relationship. Whereas, and I'm not going to say that that's not bad, because we have some basis for that in Islam, the issue of attraction. But if that's exaggerated, it's problematic. The other side is that, the issue of duty. A contractual marriage is a contractual relationship, and it has duties, and we keep it moving. We contract this relationship and we build this family, and a lot of times emotions may not be a part of that. And so you have a lot of people come out of the Muslim world, or they come out of cultures which have come out of the Muslim world, and they have that orientation towards marriage. And sometimes that works for maintaining the relationship. And we gave the example, which is a problematic example, how in some communities, even if there's physical violence, the community will encourage, in specific, the sister to stay in that relationship no matter what. And so, we mentioned that's problematic. But there's a part of that, the idea of duty, of maintaining the relationship, of trying to work it out, which is not problematic. It's the issue of the physical violence that's problematic. But the value of being committed, no matter what, you know what I'm saying? That just needs to be modified a little bit, just like the idea of the necessity of emotions. And we gave the example too. We gave the example of that video that's going around of that couple from Iran, in which they have a comparison. It's a parallel in the video. An older couple and a younger couple, and they're driving. And I don't want to get into all the details other than to say, but the video just shows that the younger couple is arguing and there's a child in the car. And the older couple, and it's very visible that they are, practicing Muslims in the imagery. And the man is reciting poetry of love to his wife. He was reciting Hafid, who's an Iranian poet. And she's reciting back. And they have like this relationship with each other. And the man also is shown in the video to give sadaqah to the poor young children that are roaming the streets. So there's a dynamic of the character that's there, right? And that's one of duty, one of principles and deen and values, and also that romance side. I would say the love side more than the romance side, right? To use it in a better sense. There's a certain respectable manifestation of love and warmth in the relationship, and that's a beautiful model where you combine two realities. Where you combine the two realities, whereas the other couple is a mess. They're just going back and forth with each other in public, in their cars, visible, and in front of the children. And so the children, what they see is that madness. And so, that's why, this is something that we have to realize, that the concept of family and marriage has been destroyed. That's healthy. The concept that's healthy has been destroyed, not only here in the US, but globally. Globally, there is a lot of shifts that have taken place. So we need to understand the whole issue of conflict resolution, and if we have no concept of priorities, if we have no concept of understanding what's important in the family life. And again, we mentioned that, of those things which is important, we mentioned firstly, a lot of times you find people are not even prepared themselves with their own lives and their deen. And the phenomenon that I'm seeing and listening to people and counseling people, a lot of people, I hate to use this term because it's not the best term, but they're damaged. They're damaged. And I use that term because people use it and they know what I mean by that. But I would say that people are emotionally distressed, disoriented, in some cases emotionally collapsed, and they're jumping into relationships. This is across cultures. And so, and then also you find, certain expectations in certain cultures. You're married by a certain age and so on and so forth. And then if that is not done, the culture looks at you as like you have an issue. Whereas in Islam, none of that exists. But the Islam doesn't say that there's a certain point that you can get married and not get married. Islam leaves that open. But cultures, they create psychological issues for people, certain expectations, right? And when you don't deal with social realities and understand them properly and look at the economic situation that the world is in, it's problematic. This is what, you have in the rat race, you have an issue where it's like there's an expectation in some cultures to have gold, to have an apartment that's rented for a whole year or a house bought. You have, then you have to have a big wedding. Then you have to throw a party, and then you have to furnish everything, and so on and so forth. And you start looking at like, is that, are you even being realistic given the economic situation the world is in to have that type of approach? The mahar is 100,000, $250,000, 50,000, 10,000, 20,000. And then you have the opposite extreme, where is the issue of no mahar or a basic ring or the ayat of the Quran or whatever it may be from that angle, which is not in itself a problem. But what happens is that the facilitation of marriage like that, without people really having an understanding of maturity, like, what is it that you're looking for as far as the qualities of a brother to get married? Like what are those qualities that are there that's going to prove to you or that sister that they're willing to stay in the marriage? Because if you're facilitating the marriage, the unfortunate part that comes along with that is that you're facilitating the divorce. And that has become the issue, right? That has become the issue. And sometimes that's why those big mahars are there. Is aside from the problematic issues of people, doing a big mahar because the sister's a virgin and that type of stuff. But the opposite extreme is there in the facilitation of the marriages, the issue of facilitation of divorce. And then the opposite extreme is there with the high mahar, which is the difficulty of divorce, and even in situations in which there's physical violence. And so there's no balance. But both situations have positives and negatives. We do need to facilitate marriage, but we need to also make sure that people are not just divorcing for the sake of divorcing. And so that brings us to the issue of conflict resolution. And we mentioned a part of this issue yesterday. We said that, we're aware of the hadith that says that the most despised thing to Allah Ta'ala from the halal, is divorce. And we know that there's some problems with the hadith. We know that. But those who completely throw out the hadith, they create a dynamic which is extremely problematic, because in principle it is true that that is the issue of divorce is something which is problematic. It's something which should be used in necessity, not something which is used based upon somebody thinking that they have the need for it just to have the need for it. Because you're talking about the destruction of relationships and communities and lives of children and people's psychological health. You know how many cases there has been that I've become privy to. There's a trend, of people becoming suicidal, during the divorce process or after the divorce. It's problematic. And so when those type of hadith, even though they have problematic, like nubayin al-hukm, we make clear what the ruling is, but then we also talk about how the ulama use the concept, because it's a concept, right? And in principle, there's legitimacy to it. So the logic which just dismisses that is problematic in an environment which we don't, in this environment, in the U.S. environment, in the Western environment, we don't have to emphasize the issue of divorce not having a stigma, because we don't have a problem with that. That may be a cultural problem among some Muslims in some communities in the West or in the U.S., but that's not a general cultural American problem. Actually, the problem here is that divorce is too rampant, the lack of marriage. But in the Middle East, that's a different discussion. Places like that. In other places, that's a different discussion. But here, we don't have the value of marriage at this point, right? And so we actually facilitate divorce, and we have destigmatized it. And so the reality is that concept of trying to destigmatize it doesn't work here, because there is no real stigma. Women have the ability to work. They have the ability to make moves. They have support from here and there in this society, right? And so if a woman were to get divorced in this society, there's not an issue. You know what I'm saying? In a real sense. There may be an issue among her people and her culture, but there's not a real issue. So we need to bring back the issue of the valuing of marriage and understanding of how to utilize divorce. When is it valid and when is it not valid? Because we don't want people to stay in abusive relationships as well. Relationships that, that destroy people and destroy the children psychologically, emotionally, and destroy their concept of Islam. So conflict resolution is extremely important. And part of that conflict resolution is understanding how to work through issues. Islam, when it comes to the marital process, has a system of conflict resolution. We don't use it. And part of the issue that I brought up yesterday was that the concept of wali, or the concept of the guardian, is misunderstood. And there's a reason why I bring that up. There's a connection here. The issue is because part of conflict resolution in Islam is that when things get to a certain point in the marriage, which they call for intervention, what you find is actually the wali, or those who stand in that person's place from the family especially, or others outside of the family, may be designated like the imam or the sheikh or whatever. That's there for trying to work out the situations in a marriage. Even the concept of the separation of the 3 talaqs, even though, aside from all the jidal, all the back and forth in fiqh, if it's bid'ah to mention the talaq 3 times or not, all that stuff, it becomes not relevant in it of itself. In the sense that when we're talking about the issue of the marital issue, if we want to do real fiqh, we have to look at all the ranges of opinions that are out there. The mufti has to look at all of the opinions that are out there, regardless of madhab, because here we're talking about safeguarding the family. And so the mufti has to have an understanding of when it is that this particular opinion is applied and when it is that particular opinion is not applied, predicated upon the situation that those people are in that marriage, right? And you can't give necessarily a general ruling. You have to see what's going on. So the problem that we encounter is that we don't follow that system of conflict resolution. So there is no arbitration. And a lot of times there's no arbitration because the people are not following the system. They immediately go into divorce, right? And then they don't follow the process of working that out. And part of that's because people don't know how to implement that. And then the other issue is that the idea is that is the idea that's problematic, or this actually the situation is problematic, is that many times there's no wali. Even if the person has a father, there's no wali. And so we said there's a couple of things, and we mentioned this yesterday, that the wali, in principle, should have a conflict of interest note, meaning that you don't marry the person that's under your wilayah, because the idea of the wali initially is that's the right of the father, the right of the brothers, the right of the uncle, depending on who's there in the order. And the concept of wilayah is tied into the issue of inheritance, which has its own system as well. And so the issue that we confront in societies in which there's a brokenness in families, or when people come into Islam and they're the only Muslim, especially the sisters, is that they have no wali, they have no guardian. And so then that guardianship transfers to the imam. That guardianship transfers to the sheikh. Initially, it's supposed to transfer to the leader overall of the Muslim community in the traditional sense. That would be the political leader, but that's not there. So it transfers to the imam, it transfers to the sheikh or whatever. But if the sheikh or the imam or the brother or whoever has wilayah, has the guardianship in that sense over that sister in the case of marriage, it's a conflict of interest with the position and the role of the wilayah that you're seeking to marry the sister. So how can you be on the side of the sister in that case to resolve conflict if you are interested in marrying the sister? We took it even to the point of saying that if you have interest for that sister to marry somebody like one of your relatives, that you may need to pass on the wilayah to somebody else, because you may manipulate that sister. And we've seen those types of cases. And we said the friendship also that becomes complicated. It becomes complicated when, one wali is hooking up the brother with his sister with his friend or whatever it may be. But that's a little more loose than this issue of, relatives and all of that and so on and so forth. But still, it's problematic. And these are things that we have not really thought through properly. And they have led to issues. A lot of sisters have complained about the issue of the wali and how that goes sour. But that's part of conflict resolution, is having somebody that's designated, if you don't have that in your family, that will stand there by your side as a woman. And it's not just the issue of being there for the marital contract. Because when we look at the issue, for instance, in the Hanafi madhab, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he looked at the whole concept of wilayah from the angle that the woman if she has the ability to determine compatibility, and we talked about that yesterday when we talked about the issue of profiling. There's a part 1 to this video. This is a part 2, that we said that profiling has a lot to do with determining compatibility in one sense, and also knowing yourself and knowing the others and knowing what's going on in the families and all. You're building a profile. But that's the issue of determining compatibility. So the wali, in the thinking of Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullahi alayhi, is there to determine compatibility, to help the sister determine compatibility. And so then he saw that the sister, if she has maturity, she can do that for herself. But with the condition that if that compatibility is not there, then the wali has the right of divorce. It's not just an open game that, I just make a move on my own. And part of the issue that you have in the way that opinion is abused and misused sometimes is that when you have a conflict, if the approach that you took is the sister is just doing her own marriage under the determination that she can determine compatibility on her own and that's it, then she has no support later on. And that's the same thing with the Okidok Wali, right? The Okidok Wali is the one that's not really concerned for that sister's well-being. Then later on, when that sister has a conflict, or even a brother, because sometimes, the brother in the relationship, if there's a conflict within the marriage, if there's a solid wali, the brother can go to the wali and try to work out issues. But if there's no third party to work out the issues, no one that the sister listens to, or no one that the sisters has the that sister has to lean on, then there's no real way of working anything out. Because when the conflict takes place, part of the issue is that you can have a third party to come to resolve the issue. And so when you leave the stress between the two people, the stress of the conflict, you don't really get anywhere. So having a solid understanding of the conflict resolution process in the marriage is important. And that's there for the protection of the Muslims. But the Muslims themselves are not determined in that way to really establish that for themselves. To really establish Islamic principles and how you navigate. That it's a multiple step process before just jumping to divorce. And again, because it is so grave. That's why we go back to those who just want to argue on the weakness of the hadith, or the unusability, or the unreferability, or that is not qualified as a reference point. The hadith that says that the most despised thing to Allah wa ta'ala is divorce. They have issues with their hadith. The scholars of hadith, some of them have issues. For those who keep harping on that point, you're not bringing another system to be able to work things out. But you see that Islam goes through that multiple step process because divorce, it is problematic. It is the dissolution of a contractual relationship between families. And it just happens to be that two individuals represent two families, but it's a dissolution. And so you can see why it would be that would be injected into the thinking of the scholars, even if the hadith has some issues, that they would proffer that hadith or put it forward, even while clarifying the strength of the hadith, because they want that principle to be there, that look, slow down, caution. They don't just jump, into that type of, and don't just throw yourself in the rope because it's dangerous, that type of idea. So then it becomes like a traffic light process, where it's, there's steps and stages to that. And then it's like when you get at a certain point in time, it's dangerous for you to navigate. And so that's how it becomes. Like if we don't, if we don't know how to communicate, and that's the other part of conflict resolution, a lot of us don't know how to communicate. A lot of us, we think that communication, some people have the idea that leadership is something inborn. And then, some people have along with that the idea that communication is something that's inborn. And in reality, if you've been hurt, or if you've been in various situations, or if there's an imbalance in the relationship, then the truth of the matter is that communication is not going to be something that's settled, that's there. People are going to have an issue with communication, right? They're going to have an issue with communicating because they don't really know how to communicate. And then the thing is that here we're talking about the transference of information and feelings and ideas and so on and so forth between two people, two different worlds, two different background experiences. So it could be the case sometimes that a person may be communicating with you in a nonverbal way, but you didn't understand that communication process, whereas another person is verbal. And that's where we said, that the profiling concept that's there prior to picking a spouse, that you kind of seeing like, should I deal with this person and why? That has to still continue. That whole idea of understanding the other person has to still continue. Sometimes it takes a solid 5 years in a relationship to come to determination of where that person is coming from. Just to come to like, a state of neutrality of like, this is how I work things out, and respect me. You know what I'm saying? And so it takes time to get to know a person. And that's why, it's very, this is another issue, that understanding the different stages. I didn't actually put this down, but you can put this under the whole issue of profiling and getting to know one another after the marriage. Even still, that process continues, of getting to know the other person. Sometimes there's older people that have experience. We've seen this in the community. They'll say, oh, that's the 7-year itch. Oh, that's the first year honeymoon. Oh, about 5 years in the marriage, this happened. Oh, about, 10 years, this happens. People that have been married and they've dealt with people with stability, they know that marriage goes to different stages. And so they know also that sometimes you need to renew the spirit of the marriage, because things are injected in the marriage, like work, children, and that also, and trauma, drama, it pulls the marriage apart. And so that's another thing, is like kind of mapping the way that marriage works. You know what I'm saying? That, things that happen in the marriage. And that's why we mentioned in another video that has nothing to do with this, that, there's an importance of elders, in our lives. Elders in our lives, they give us experience in situations in which you're really not going to understand. Stable communities have elders, and those elders are people usually that know, if you talk about stability in a community, that know families. So, they know families, they know history, they know a lot of things. So a lot of times those people, they give you insight. This family had this type of problem when this person hit this age. It's not uncommon for this to happen in this community or whatever. And so, but without elders, everybody's like trying to figure out and experiment on their own. Be my guest. I'll be honest with you. Be my guest. You trash your life if you want. But, the reality is, without elders, you can't gain the insight. And so without elders around, you can't gain, even from the angle of those elders may not know your family, but elders that have experience in life. And not everybody gets to be called an elder, but certain people have gained that title. And so these people, these elders, they have life experience. And so that it does a lot for people that are struggling with issues in a time of conflict. Usually you're disoriented and you're moving off of emotions. And so elders have a tendency of because they have time with them and they've been through so many situations, they have a tendency of giving you like, a wide, long scope type of, advice, which is like hindsight 2020. But they have the ability to transfer their hindsight to you so that you don't fall into those issues. If you don't want to avail yourself of elders, that's your problem. I mean, everything doesn't need to be supported logically with a logical argument, with persuasion of why you should do this or do that. These things are natural, and only in an unnatural, insane environment do we not have that around. And the same thing that we said, when you start talking about solid people of knowledge in a community. When you have that absent, then what governs is ignorance. And a person that's a person of knowledge doesn't have to know everything, but they have the ability to access and think about things, when we start talking about Islamic scholarship. But that's a deviation point anyway. So the issue of communication and conflict resolution, it involves having certain skills. And those things have to be developed, right? And one of the things, and I want to close off with this, that I really, I hit on this already, but the third point is the issue of economics. I really worry in some communities, the issue of the divorce rate a lot of times is tied into economics because it leads to frustration and stress. I worry that people don't understand themselves. They don't understand social realities, and they don't know how to navigate in imperfect situations. And I worry because in some communities, the issue of unemployment is a very real reality, and it's or underemployment. And so, you can't sit there and tell poor people not to marry, because even rich people, you may buy your way into a relationship with your money, but you may not have any other qualities to build on. So and then you can have poor people that maybe they struggle in the relationship, but they have an understanding of working things out and an issue of commitment to each other, and their life is better than someone that has $1 million or someone that has $250,000 or whatever it is that they make a year. And so we don't want to demonize the poor, right? And that's not something that we have seen Islamically, that the poor are demonized. But it's a very real reality that in some communities, the issue of the poverty rate is very high, and it will remain for a while because you have some structural situations in the society which bar certain groups from being able to function at a high level in large numbers. That doesn't mean that everybody in that community, has issues, but it does mean that some people, a certain percentage in that community have issues. And so we have to understand social realities and how they impact us. Last thing I want to add with regard to social realities is that there's a lot of value changes in the society itself. And so a lot of times, like right now, we're going through a massive dehumanization, demonization of men. Whereas before, there was the issue of the marginalization of women. And so if we're not understanding how it is that these cultural shifts are having an impact on the way that we look at each other, and if we're not understanding how it is that economics has a way of messing up the way that we look, you're not a man because you don't have money, that type of thing. You know, if we don't have an understanding of social realities and how they impact us and how they impact our relationships. You could be rich. I know a family that was rich and they lost everything. They lost everything, you know. And so the issue becomes, okay, so now you lost everything. Does the relationship crumble because everything is gone? You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of issues that come up in this stuff. Well, you know, sometimes, let's be blunt. You know, there's no there's no shyness in knowledge. You know, sometimes there are infertility issues on the part of the man or the woman. You know, and so the issue becomes, okay, do you tear down the relationship? You may have an understanding of, you know, that is a right of divorce, but, you know, do you just tear down the relationship because that's not working for you? Or do you kind of try to work through that type of issue? And so the point that I'm making is that you have to be clear on what you're there for. That's why deen is so important. You know, if it's just the issue of my rights and what I want, and because this is a powerful economic move, this gives me an opportunity. You know, some brothers marry some sisters because the fathers are rich. You know, and they see opportunity for a come up. It has nothing to do with building anything other than themselves. And there's situations in which those brothers, once they make it to the place that they want to be at economically, is out the door, divorce. They move on to the next one. You know, and we see those types of things take place quite often, unfortunately, because the values of the Muslims have been skewed. You know, and so the understanding of the social realities is important in today's time because there are systematic attempts. And don't say conspiratorial, this, that. No. It's factual. You know, it's factual. The children are targeted. You know, the women are targeted. The men are targeted. And so there's values changes that come from the marketplace, that come from the culture, and they impact how we think about everything from our sex lives to our physical appearance, to our communication, to how we dress, to how we perceive the world, and what is our values in life. And a lot of times we carry on multiple personalities because we have that religious persona, and then we have that social persona, and then we have that life ambition persona. And a lot of times those personas, there's no integrity between them, you know, and so and that integrity is not grounded in Islam. And so a lot of times we ourselves are all over the place and we don't admit it because we're operating out of shell existence. You know, we're operating out of what people see and the image that we give to people, we project, but we're not really looking at ourselves and noting that we're struggling. That's why we say understanding social realities is very important. And how it impacts us, how it impacts the future of the family, how it impacts a lot of things. And you have an understanding that the stability that was there 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago in society and in family life is no longer there. And so it takes a lot more effort to maintain a marriage than we've ever seen in any time in history. Because there is no tribal support. You have some people that can't even drop their children off to the grandparents. Because the grandparents don't even have any love for the children, you know, and so husband and wife is burdened with being the village, and so the idea of it takes a village to raise a child, which is a very true statement, is not there for many people. Not there for many people. I had a case that I heard of recently, non-Muslims, where the young girl, she witnessed that her mother put a restraining order on her father. And so they had to separate the family. And so that's, you know, that becomes kind of the norm. I heard of another case recently where a brother was talking about the issue of children in the Boston area being removed from the home. And so by Child Protective Services. So he was making the comment, can Child Protective Services, before they remove a child, make sure that they have a safe place or somewhere to put that child? hopefully the family, right? And so the reason why I give that example is because that's just an indication that people don't really have supports, because it is a practice of child services. It is a practice of child services in some states to immediately go to the family if there's something that takes place with the mother and the father, and they're going to remove. They look for an aunt, for an uncle, for a grandparent, for a cousin, for somebody in the family first. That's something that was recommended by some of the organizations that consult child services. And so, that's the issue of the social realities, how they impact us. We don't pay attention to that enough. The stability is not there. That was why I had gotten into that example, as it used to be. So we have to prepare ourselves for a situation in which there's a heavy load of stress that's put on the mother and the father, and the mother and the father are a lot of times on their own. So they're like soldiers against the world, and that's really, unfortunately, that's really where it's at in today's time. It's not a healthy approach to things. That you have these two people like Bonnie and Clyde, they're just battling the world. That's not a good approach, because it's supposed to be, the concept of village and community. And we would have hoped that the Muslims would have achieved that. And for some people, they may have something that looks like a village, but the reality of their culture is that their family interferes in a negative way, because the values that those tribal organizations have, or configurations, is not necessarily always Islamic. And so, you have human interests that come into play, and you have human deficiencies, and there's no real rule of governing that. And so you have, in-laws and others that come in and they destroy the marriage for some people, and sometimes those who don't have the family support are better off in that regard, but then they lose out in other issues. I want to end on that note, because we can go on this stuff. But we need to look at the issue of, some principles of pre-marriage, and while we're in the marriage, and hopefully you can do a talk. I'm going to close out this talk on the whole issue of radical reformation, and I want to talk about the issue of divorce in another context, in another setting. The whole issue of divorce and the process of divorce and post-divorce, and some of the issues that we confront as Muslims in this regard. There's a lot of issues that we confront that are extremely problematic in the way people handle divorce. And it has an impact on their psychological well-being, and it has an impact on the community, because what it does is it undermines the confidence in marriage when you see, rampant divorce. So young people look at that and they see nothing but instability. So you have a lot of young people nowadays that don't even have confidence in marriage because of what they have experienced by way of their parents or what they see in the community. And then there's the issue, of what how you deal with the children. So we'll leave that analysis or reflection, for another set of lives. But we end with this, and we just, we ask that we really reconsider how it is that we're doing spousal selection, that we have more information on how we deal with these things, and how it is that we navigate through the marriage. And, like I said in the other talk, الأصل في الزواج الديمومة والاستقرار. That the principle, Islamic principle with regard to marriage is stability and constancy, right? Or consistency. All those words work there, but those two concepts are there overall. And so, it's about stabilizing the marriage, not at all cost, but stabilizing the marriage, not at the cost of someone being harmed and all of that type of stuff, but leave out those types of extremes. But at, on the average, and that means that emotions, are for a lot of us points of instability. And, that's why we talked about communication. When you don't have proper emotions in place and how to deal with yourself, this is how cheating takes place. This is how people become unsatisfied in the relationship. Physical connection by itself is not going to make this work. It's going to drive the relationship apart. And some people are just not at that level. That's the unfortunate part, is that where they're at as human beings in their development, that they're not at a level where communication is solid. And so that's why we mentioned in the first, video that there's an issue of self-development before you go into marriage and while you're in the marriage. And a lot of us miss that point. And we miss a lot of these points because there's nobody to really teach us. There's no one to really teach us. So we're just winging it. We're winging it, and that becomes a serious issue. The way that we do marriage, and that has to change. Marriage is a science and an art. Winging it, for Muslims that are supposed to be a people of knowledge, is extremely problematic. Even the non-Muslims, they at least refer to, some sort of, the counseling of marriage, and how to make your marriage a better relationship, and how to better yourself and all that. And but we don't, and we're not looking at marriage as an art and a science that requires a lot from us, and it requires some development. What we're doing is just jumping into these situations based on feeling and custom, and not really based on knowledge. And this is not solvable. The crisis of marriage is not solvable with just saying we got to teach people their rights. That's the worst thing that you do. When you have people that are internally destroyed, it's like giving them a sword, and they don't know what to do with it. And so everything becomes my right, my right, my right. It's not good in that regard. Knowing rights is important, but that has, like we mentioned, in the context of adab, in the concept of having a solid concept of love. And we mentioned that in the first video that, the issue of romance in an Islamic sense, we talked about how, in Islamic culture, love poetry was there. So there is that side. Is not that nasty Roman Greek dirty club romance, kicking game type of approach. But there is that whole issue of, the dance that people have in the love dynamic. But there's also the issue of adab. And then there's the issue of rights and responsibilities and duties. Right. But when a lot of times people talk about, we need to teach sisters their rights. Well, if a brother doesn't know how to be a man, it doesn't matter how much you're going to teach a sister her rights. What are you doing in a relationship? You can teach rights all you want all day long, but if the brother doesn't know how to be a human being, that's not going to solve the situation. It's not going to better the situation. All it's going to do is create a reality in which there's boundaries. It's going to lead to divorce. If you're really interested in solving the situation, you have to look at it from both angles. Where are the people at in their development, and what's the conception of the marriage, and how it is that marriage can grow? It's not a war of the sexes, and Muslims have made this a war of the sexes, when actually in Islam, it's like some of the African Afrocentrist thinkers, they talk about how marriage was in Africa is a complementarity. It's a complementarity. And so that's where, that completeness or that wholeness, can come in the context of relationships. Because we're not going to say that people that are not married are not whole, right? That depends upon where they're at with themselves spiritually and intellectually and emotionally and all that. But in the context of making a contractual relationship, that's what makes it whole, is that the two people are coming together to form a new entity, so to speak, a new identity for themselves. But anyway, I want to end on that note. There's a lot to be said. We need to do work, and we need to stop being popish about this. We need to stop being, on the war of the sexist note. We need to stop being just male domination. We need to stop being a lot of things, and we need to, figure out how we're going to radically reform our situation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.